My parents were born in Mississippi, primarily Starksville, in a little community called Rock Hill, which is pretty segregated. It's all African American, and that kind of led to them growing up in a very segregated place. So most of their life they had to deal with segregated policies, separate water fountains, separate restaurants, separate entrances to restaurants, separate schools, in most cases inferior accommodations. And so when they became of age and they needed to get jobs, it was very difficult. The really only options were something illegal like selling moonshine or being some type of indentured servant. My dad took the plunge and moved west and lived with my mom's sister until he was able to find a job. And he was very surprised at how different San Pedro was. He came directly to San Pedro. At the time, San Pedro probably wasn't perfect, but it was a very diversified place. And that diversity allowed, I think, San Pedro to thrive where they needed to use all bodies, not just a portion of the economy. And so he started off basically doing side jobs, and then he partnered with this Yugoslavian guy named Gustavo. My dad called him Goosey. And they were able to build cabinets mainly for kitchens and do construction work, and which ultimately led to them getting contracts with Long Beach Naval Shipyard, and they became fully employed at the Long Beach Naval Shipyard. So it allowed them to experience something he would have never experienced in the segregated South, which ultimately led to him making enough money to send for my two sisters who were born in Mississippi. I was ultimately born here. So I have very little recollection of the South other than going back on family vacations. And so most of my parents' child raising was based on the South, which means that they were very strict and they were concerned about us like going outside the neighborhood, because if you did that in Mississippi, the girls could get raped or the boys not come home, they could get hanged. So it was a very strict environment that I grew up in, very religious environment. So oftentimes when my friends who I met here would come over, they're like, wow, your parents are so strict. But in a strange kind of way, most of my friends like coming over the house. Maybe they just like following us and seeing us get spanked all the time, or they like the structure that my parents had. So my parents were surprised that I had friends that were not all black when I would bring them by the house. So San Pedro, again, was very integrated. And so, you grow up, you play baseball, basketball, and football at Peck Park or some of the local places, and everyone in your team doesn't look like you. So I had white friends who were primarily Croatian, Italian friends. I had Asian friends. One of my best friends was George Vidal, who was Filipino. I had Samoan friends, and my parents were shocked. Not just shocked that white parents would let their white kids come and play with us. And my friends, I would go over their house, they weren't shocked at all that a black kid could go over their house. So it was just like hanging out in the neighborhood. I'm not saying San Pedro was perfect, but it just wasn't what they were expecting when they left the segregated South.